Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Cathedral webinar. We are coming to you live on November 20th, 2025, and you are tuning in for day 3 of this kickoff of the leadership series. You're going to be learning about communication strategies today from your instructor, Dr. William R. Latchford, who is president of the Native Peacekeeper Consultant Group. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're also thrilled you could tune in for today's webinar. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer, please. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law printed here. This is just a friendly reminder that your webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Speaking of the webinar materials, I did drop a link for you in the chat to today's presentation slides. And then moving forward, if you need to revisit the course, maybe you missed day 1 or day 2, you can find the recordings of those sessions as well as the PDF of the slides for download in the courses section here on the platform. If you tune in for our next webinar, you'll join the same way you did today. Just look for that green banner at the top of the screen. If you see that green banner, that means a webinar is happening live. We do ask that you join with listen-only capabilities. If you remember, we're recording them, so it just helps to cut down on audio feedback that messes up the recording. And if you find that the sound is coming out of the wrong place, maybe you're trying to use your headphones, maybe you have a Bluetooth speaker, whatever the case might be, you can come down to the bottom of your screen. You might not have the telephone icon like I do. You might have a headset icon. But if that's the case, you'll just click on that and it'll pull up a list of your speaker devices and you can select the proper one. Even though we ask you to join with your mic disabled, we do, of course, want to encourage class participation regardless. So we're primarily going to rely on the public chat for that. If you don't yet have it expanded, you can come over here to the messages panel in gray. It's to the far left of your screen. If you click on public chat, and then come on down to where it says send message to public chat. You can click in there, type what you want to say or ask. If you have any tech support issues that I can help you navigate through, you could do that as well. And just type what you want to say and hit enter, or you can click on the cute little paper airplane button, and that will send it in where everyone can see. Something else I want to draw attention to on the messages panel is the shared notes section. Every webinar, I put a list of important links in there for you. You can find the webinar feedback survey link. You could register for our email blast so you know when our webinars are happening. There's a link for our webinar archive on our YouTube channel. There's all kinds of good stuff in there. And then if you did join with your mic unmuted, I'm going to remember. No, I'm just kidding. You can always come over here and mute yourself. There's a little mic icon. And then not to worry, I'm usually watching for it, so I might mute you in advance. And then if you asked a question or made a comment and you think maybe we missed you, you could just come over to the hand raise feature that's in that far right bottom corner and let us know that we missed something in the chat. But we do want to make sure everybody's engaged, and you can test out your chat for me real quick by introducing yourselves. It's nice to see who all is present in the webinar. You can let us know your name, where you're tuning in from, your work or your role in Indian country, and your tribal affiliation if you have one. You might be a tribal employee and you don't have your own tribal affiliation. That's okay too. You are absolutely still welcome. And then just a quick final note while you guys are introducing yourselves in the chat, you want to make sure that you do your best to avoid clicking on that red menu panel that's all the way to the left of your screen. You might not have yours expanded. Yours might be just these little icons, but just know that if you click on it, it's going to take you to whatever you clicked on and it'll pull you out of the webinar immediately. There won't be like a warning message or anything. You can always just rejoin the webinar by clicking on the green banner again, but I do just want to give you that heads up that if you click there, it's going to pull you out. All right, y'all, while you're introducing yourselves in the chat, it is with great pleasure that I introduce your webinar instructor, Dr. William R. Latchford. And Will, I have made you presenter now. Wait.
All right, thank you, Brooke. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to participate in this webinar. I understand and I recognize your valued employees for your tribes and for your housing authorities, and to take an hour, hour and a half out of your day every day takes a lot, and it's although it's needed and we need to do that as leaders, but I also recognize the fact that sometimes because of everything going on, it impacts us in all different ways. So I want to thank you and just let you know that I appreciate you being on. And it just shows your commitment to personal growth and professional growth. So thank you for being on today. This is one of many leadership courses that we're going to be discussing over the next year. Native Learning Center has put on a great program that just gives a little bit of nuggets on each leadership category. This is one of 16 webinars that'll be delivered over the next 9-10 months. As you can see, here's the schedule. This is the third one. It's called Communication Strategies. So today we're going to talk a little bit about communication and how that impacts us, and some of those arenas that we're in, and how communication derives from either the success of our leadership or the failure of our leadership, or success of an operation or failure of an operation. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And hopefully you'll be able to take some information away that you can implement immediately within your organization. If not, this webinar is also built for just kind of to educate you, to give you and arm you with information that you can always just go back to it and kind of make you think about different things on how we do things, how we self-reflect, how do we communicate professionally and personally, right? Because when we communicate, do we have a separate part of our brain where we communicate from a business aspect or while we're at work, or do we communicate the same way or different when we're at home? And the verbiage that we use and really how we carry ourselves. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we navigate today's webinar. As you can see on the screen, and for the sake of time, so I don't hold you all afternoon, you can see the multiple titles that these webinars are really going to address. Again, 90 minutes isn't enough to give you the whole aspect of any leadership topic, but it gives you that opportunity to kind of whet your appetite, where it gives you enough information where you can derive off of. You can do follow-ups, you can find different reading materials, or even ask questions through Native Learning Center, or you can look at building on your leadership and signing up for other classes that are out there in the industry. So as we look at today, we want to talk about communication strategies. And when we look at communication, the question that I would ask you, and just think about for a second for yourself, regardless of the location you're at, is, does your communication build bridges, or do they build walls? Just think about that for a second, and self-reflect for yourself. When you talk to somebody as a leader, if you're currently in a leadership position, do you talk to your subordinates or your equivalent leaders? Do you build bridges, or do you build walls? And that's something we always have to self-reflect on as we communicate, because communication isn't a one-off. It's not something to say, okay, I'm great at communicating, I can stop learning. Communication is something that we will always have to evolve with in our everyday journey, from our personal life and professional life. And it's one of those aspects in life that really can make or break us, because there's many aspects of communication that help us, that provide that foundation for us to grow, but it also sometimes hinders us, because it's a mixture of our emotions that are involved, sometimes our predisposed thoughts that we have going on in our mind, and just the crisis we may be involved in, right? Sometimes we're in a crisis and our communication, we snap at people, or our communication isn't as thorough as what it should be when we're just not under stress. So communication is a key factor that sometimes I don't think gets the credit in trainings that we do across all of our industries, because it's really the forefront, right? We go through and we kind of hit the surface of communication, but it should be a constant, should be part of that retraining that we do to just keep us on track, to make sure that we're proficient and we're always learning. Have you ever wondered why it seems so difficult to talk with some people, and yet there's other people that it's very easy to talk to? When you go through your everyday life and you have employees or coworkers, there's some people you can speak to, and it's very easy to speak to them, and it's just fluid between you and them. And then there's other employees or people in your community that it's challenging and it's difficult right? Do you ever think about what's causing that difficult challenge? What's causing that difficult environment that's creating that, right? Emotions probably involved somewhere because it probably has to do with a past event or circumstance that happened, or just maybe a personality conflict that's going on there. But at the end of the day, communication is going to play into that circumstance and the reason why that conversation is difficult, either the lack of communication or the misleading of what you're viewing and what you're seeing from a communication standpoint. Because communication isn't always about just hearing things. Communication is a two-way street that it's got to be a partnership from the other person, and it's not just verbal, it's also nonverbal. So we want to look at what are those circumstances that create those verbal and nonverbal cues that we may or may not identify, and we may miss as we're going through our communication process. So we want to emphasize that effective communication is the foundational skill, right? It's a foundational skill that we all need. It's kind of like walking, right? It's a skill that in order for us to move around, if we don't have any impairments, we need to be able to walk. We need to know how to walk. We need to know how to get ourselves moving, right? So communication is a fundamental skill. It's crucial for both your professional world and your personal life, right? And your personal well-being. So communication is something that we all deal with. We probably don't put a lot of effort into thinking about how we're communicating because our lives are moving so fast, right? And a lot of times our communication, now you throw in social media, you throw in technology with emails, and we'll talk a little bit about that today when we go through this presentation on how that affects communication and how people perceive, how we're communicating with them. As we look at some of the common challenges, there's some common misconceptions about communication, right? The initial focus when we think about communication is about when someone speaks to us. To address this, we immediately want to highlight that communication is a two-way street that involves not just active listening, but it involves the nonverbal cues, the body language, right? The eye movement, the hand movement, right? And just maybe the twitch in the leg. Our body gives off so much cues that when we're talking to somebody, we kind of just tend to listen to what somebody's saying, right? And then it brings us to, are we listening to understand or are we listening to respond? But our body is giving off so many different attributes that we can pick up on when we're talking to somebody. We can look at them in the eyes, see where their eyes are moving. Are they paying attention? Are they looking at us, but they're really trying to formulate an answer? Because as soon as we get done talking, they're going to go ahead and just spat out whatever information they want to give us. Are their hands twitching? Are they nervous, right? Are they nervous speaking to you? Are they mad, right? Does their complexion change to where they're red or you can tell they're agitated at something? So our body gives off a lot of different clues and cues that it's not just about the words. And so if you get anything out of this webinar today, and you walk away with just a little tool, next time you're talking to somebody, scan them, right? Scan the individual without being offensive, but kind of see if you can pick up on some of those cues that they're giving you. And most of the time they don't even know they're giving them, right? They don't even know that their complexion is changing, right? I can tell you I'm a fair skinned person, and sometimes when I was working and something really irritated me, I may not have said anything, and I put my head down, and the person sitting next to me and say, "Hey, you all right? Your head's kind of red." Well, the top of my head, because I don't have a lot of hair and I cut my hair short, they would sit and say, "Hey, are you all right?" They would see that my head would get red because I'm holding really what I want to say. I'm holding that in because I don't want to put it out in the way I'm feeling, right? So my communication, although I'm not talking, I'm actually communicating it out because they can see a little bit. They don't know exactly what it is, but they can see, okay, something's wrong with him because his head is red, and either he's mad, or maybe he's getting sick. But they knew me enough because they work with me that there was something that I was just biting my tongue with, and I wasn't going to bring it out then, but I'd bring it out later on once I kind of processed the information. So we want to make sure that we look at those nonverbal cues when we're talking to people. And we'll go over that a little bit today when we dive into communication strategies. We want to connect also those scenarios when it comes to your professional life, right? When you're at work, you deal with team collaboration, you deal with client negotiations, you deal with, customers that you may or may not know. Some you may have a relationship with, some you may not. Some may be irritated, some may be very friendly and nice to you. And then when we go home, we have those family discussions, right? Sometimes they're similar or a parallel with the work conversations, right? We may have some problems at home, some challenges or adversities that we're going through, those stressors that our personal lives bring, right? We may have to resolve a conflict with our friends, right? We may have a disagreement with our friends or our neighbors, but we deal with those issues. So your professional life and your personal life, when it comes to communication, those are broad engagements that kind of interact with each other, right? There's a lot of times when we're at home and we have something happen at home and we bring it to work. We don't think we do, but we bring it to work, and then we're communicating with somebody. And the reality is our communication is based on our emotion from that we've dealt with at home, or vice versa. We're at work, something happens. I can tell you, for me, it worked this way more than the family life going into work. My work, as much as I tried to prevent it coming home, sometimes it would seep out because I'd have something at work. The stressors would be there throughout my career. And I'd go home and it would take me a little bit to transition from my work life to my home life. So my communication wasn't as good as it should be when I was at home, because I was talking as if I was talking to my employees, dealing with issues that may have been disciplinary issues at work. I was actually bringing that home. So I had to learn that process, to learn that, kind of compartmentalize my communication at work and those issues and emotions that happen at work and those nonverbal cues. I didn't want to bring that home. So I had to make sure that, for me, how would I do that? How would I navigate that world to make sure my communication was always building bridges and wasn't building walls? I was at a training last week and I had an interesting discussion with an individual who came up to me, and he talked about a lot of his employees would come to work and they had so many personal lives, personal challenges at home in their personal life, that they'd come to work and they would treat the people at work as if they were dealing with an issue at home. So we want to recognize, especially as a leader, as you go through this in your leadership journey, you want to recognize those aspects, one, for yourself, because you can't deal with others until you deal with yourself and you understand yourself. But we want to recognize, one, for ourselves, how are we managing our communication from a personal life and a professional life, and are we building bridges and navigating those two areas to assist us as we move forward? And then, two, are our employees doing the same thing? Are they communicating and maximizing their expectations and their smarts and education and their communication? Are they raising that level, raising that bar of communication, so they're effectively communicating every day when they're at work? You don't want to necessarily cross the path when they're at home, because that's their home life. But when it bleeds over from home to work, you have to address that when you're a supervisor. However, when you're at work, you have the ability to help them when they're at home. As a leader, you can talk to them. If you see them dealing with issues at work, you can remind them, listen, I know you're frustrated, and I can tell by your communication, you're snapping at other employees, you're snapping at customers. Do me a favor. Don't go home and take this out on your family. I know you're frustrated. Let's deal with the emotion here so you can go home and you really can enjoy your family, take care of your family, because that's the foundation that will always be there for you. So you have the ability when you're at work as a leader to assist your employees to learn how to communicate, not only at work, but also when they go home. I failed to mention earlier, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll monitor the chat as I go along, and I'll answer them as we go. A little bit about myself. My name is Will Latchford. I'm a doctor of criminology, and my focus of criminology is really leadership. I'm a 32-year veteran, public safety veteran. 32 years ago, I had the opportunity of being hired by the Seminole Tribe of Florida, and they provided me a great foundation to really build my career while building those relationships and helping grow their public safety organization to where I retired. There's just under 500 employees that I supervised as the executive director of public safety. I rose through all the ranks, every level of public safety that you could rise through, and I made a lot of mistakes in my career. And as I stand here today, I will tell you that I'll continue to make mistakes, because that defines our growth, right? When we have those adversities and we have those challenges, it's okay to make mistakes because we're not perfect, right? I had a lot of wins too. I had a lot of successes that I didn't have mistakes on, and I can build off of those. So and one of those areas that I failed at and I was good at and I continue to work at is communication. And that communication, I developed that communication by forcing myself to talk to people, forcing myself to look at body language. I put myself in a position to where go to the good leadership schools, the best leadership schools out there that deal with communication, how we communicate, how we kind of control our emotions and how our emotions affect communication. So I was able to attend those great courses to assist me to be able to provide that high level of concierge service to the Seminole Tribes communities. So my background right now, I'm the president of Native Peacekeeper Consulting Group. It's a family-owned business that I partnered with my wife on and a couple of our kids. And I'm also the co-director of Florida State University's Native American Crime and Justice Policy Institute. So I am on the board of adjunct professors at St. Leo University, where I was fortunate enough to get my master's and doctorate degree out of St. Leo. It's a great school that really works with working individuals. So if you're looking for an educational institution, St. Leo is a really good school that really works with the working class environment. Native Peacekeeper Consulting Group, like I said, it's a family-owned business. I partnered with my wife, Amy Osceola Latchford. It is a small business certified through the Small Business Association. It's a Seminole Native-owned business. We're actually accredited by the International Accreditation Association, and we're in the process of getting our second accreditation by another accreditation firm to where our training unit will be accredited, and any training that we provide will be accredited. So we're really excited about the future of the organization that we've built so far. We have about 15 consultants throughout the United States, to include a couple in Canada. And Amy's sole mission is to give back. She is an individual that always had the mindset and developed the principle that, it's never about yourself. It's always about others. And whatever you learn in life is just a gift that you're responsible and you have to pass that along. So that's kind of the philosophy that when we hire consultants or we go do trainings or consultant work, we make sure that whatever we touch, that's our principle, is to always give back, make it better than the way we found it, and just always enhance people's productivity, people's professionalism, and to really make a difference. And that's really what we're all about from our organization. But I can also navigate that to where I can say a lot of the housing organizations that we work with have that same philosophy. It's really a profession that you've gotten into, a service-oriented organization. And in order to be in a service population or an organization, you have to have good communication. And communication is really the foundation of your success. So we're honored to be able to instruct these 3 seminars this week. This is, again, the last one of 3. And we will have other consultants on throughout the next 13 webinars. As we go today, I shouldn't say anything that's going to be contradictory. However, if you do pick up on something I do say that's contradictory, please follow your policies. Your success is important to us, and we want to make sure that you follow your policies. So one, you don't get in trouble, but your policies are written, and hopefully they're written for the success of your organization. But if I do say something that's contradictory or you have a conflict with, please follow your policies, talk to your supervisor about, and your policy may be right. And if it's not right, that's okay. It gives you the opportunity, one, to have a conversation with somebody to bring a topic that may be a little bit of challenging or adversarial if you have to bring it to your boss. But that's all about communicating, right? So if you do have that conflict, you may want to have a discussion with your supervisors, but always follow your policy, because that's what they're there for. They're there to protect you. They're there to protect your program. They're there to protect the tribe. And the reality is they're also there to protect the community. And sometimes those layers don't understand those protections. And policies are not always right. However, there are policies that are in place, and if they're not right, and we've recognized they're not right, we need to have that communication to get those policies changed. So please, if you go through today and you have that conflict, please make sure that you go and you talk to your supervisor. All right, as we look at the course overview today, again, I challenge all of you. Have you ever wondered why conversations flow as easily with some people and not as others, right? This course is going to transform how you connect with colleagues and other people in your life. And we hope that you can take some practical skills away that will build your confidence. I will tell you, building confidence in communication is an everyday process, right? It's an everyday activity that we should pay attention to. And sometimes we are so busy in life, we don't give ourselves that opportunity to kind of look at how we talk to somebody, how our body language was, how our message is being delivered to somebody. And did we say it, but our body language said something else? Or did our body language say something and we didn't say anything at all, right? So we want to look at that today. And that's what this course is. We're going to just talk a little bit about communication strategy, something that can help you through the process. Some of the learning objectives, we're going to look to identify barriers, effective questioning, nonverbal and understanding of body language, and what does that reveal to others? Active listening. As you heard if you joined the last two courses that we had, I'm a big believer right now. I think society listens to respond and not necessarily listens to understand. And we have to change that pendulum swing so people are listening to understand, not necessarily so quick to respond. And how do we do that? We have to improve on our communication skills, right? We want to talk about navigating some of those challenges. How do we handle those difficult conversations when we have to talk to somebody about discipline issues, or talk to somebody in the community about something they're not happy with, and the end result, but they're expecting something else, and what their expectations are can't happen. How do you navigate those challenges when it comes to dealing with the community? How do you navigate the challenges when you have to discipline, or you have to, if worst case scenario, you have to terminate somebody, right? Those are difficult conversations that you have to have. And, I think I saw somebody from human resources that's on the call. Those are areas that are very challenging, right? Because when you talk to somebody, the topic may be about terminating and disciplining somebody, but at the end of the day, you look past that, right? You're human. So you're looking past when you have to terminate somebody you're looking past that their family. Who do they go home to? How do they continue to survive? Even though the issue is theirs and it should stay with them, you still have to do that communicating so you don't add any more frustration or adversity to the situation, or you set your program up for any liability issues. And you want to continue to do it with grace and professionalism. So that's very important, that as we navigate today, that we kind of take some of those nuggets from these objectives, right? Assertive approach. We want to develop confidence to address situations assertively, right? So when we look at how assertive are we, that's important. When I started my career, I know you can't tell in the camera, but I'm 6'5", and I won't share my weight with you, but I'm a pretty big guy, being 6'5", and I had to learn at a young age that I didn't really have to talk a lot, because my presence brought enough to the conversation where I didn't have to be aggressive with people with my voice. I didn't have to, show some assertiveness towards individuals, but I had to learn that. When was I going to do the assertive approach with my voice, or was I just going to show up and let my body language speak for myself? So I had to be taught that. And thankfully I had people around me who wanted to teach me and mentor me and coach me to say, listen, you're a big guy. When you go up on a scene and you go on a law enforcement scene and there's a disturbance, just your presence alone is going to start controlling the situation. So I had to learn that. I I was a young police officer, and in my mind, okay, I got to get on scene. I got to start talking to people. No, not necessarily. So I learned that, and I had to learn my assertive approach. When was I going to speak out, and when was I just going to walk up on scene and let my presence speak for itself? We're going to talk about understanding the communication process and those common barriers that we mentioned a little bit. We're going to talk about verbal communication, those techniques for clear expressions, effective questioning, nonverbal communications. We'll talk about what exercises you can do for active listening, right? You can take away some active listening exercises you can bring to your staff, and you as a leader, you can use with your staff. And then those difficult conversations that sometimes we have to have, and we need to strategize before we go in, so we navigate those conversations, right? So when we look at the communication process model, we've heard this before, but I put this in there because sometimes we need to be reminded of the basics, right? So when we have a communication process model, when we talk to people, of course, there's the sender, right? There's the sender, which formulates the thought into words, and then what they do is they transmit the message, right? So the sender thinks about what they're going to say, then they communicate it out, and they inform the travels through the chosen channel. Now, there's multiple chosen channels that we're dealing with in this 21st century, right? So there's verbal, nonverbal. We deal with emails, we deal with text messages, we deal with social media apps, right? And I can tell you from text messages, emails, social media apps, there's no emotions when someone reads what you're getting in your inbox, right? But when you send it and you're emotional, you're writing that in an aspect to where it's written emotionally. And so how is the sender taking that, right? They may or may not get that message you're sending depending on how they read it. But what happens is a lot of people write a message. If it's a happy message, usually it's taken that way. If it's not a happy message, sometimes it's not even taken as an unhappy message because the person receiving that message who decodes it, they interpret that message based on their framework, right? So you may send a message because you're irritated at somebody and you're like, all right, I'm going to write this message and I'm going to send it. Yeah, I sent it, and you told somebody how you really feel. Well, the reality is if I'm receiving your message and I'm on the other end, I may not get that same message that you're trying to pass along. You may feel better because you put it in an email to me, but I may not be receiving exactly what your message that you either emailed or texted me. So we want to remember that our recipient, they're going to interpret that message based on their own framework and that mindset they're in, right? And then feedback's generated. That's the responder or the receiver responding and confirming or understanding or seeking clarity, right? So sometimes you'll send an email out, and I remember I'd send some emails out to people, and I may have been frustrated, and I'd send just a quick email out to one of my command staff members, and they wouldn't respond to me. And then I'd see them the next day and say, hey, did you get my email? And they're like, oh, yeah, did you want me to respond to that? Well, in my mind, I wrote it, and I thought, okay, they're going to respond to me on this. And then I go back and I read it, and I'm like, oh, wow. I could see how they could take that where they didn't respond. They just read it. They heard my thought, but they didn't respond to it. So we want to look at how we communicate when we communicate with individuals. How's feedback generated back to us? Do we get that confirmation people understand what we're trying to communicate to them? And is it clear? And do they need clarity? Do they need assistance or clarification on that? So when we look at the communication model, you have the sender encodes the message. The message is transmitted through whatever channel that you choose. The receiver decodes it. They receive the message. They understand it within their framework, whatever's going on in their mind at that point. And then do we get feedback, clarification, or confirmation that we're on point and they got the exact message that we're trying to pass along to them? I put this in there. I think this was a pretty interesting statistic that's there is the 7-38-55 rule of communication. Professor Mahaban research revealed his surprising breakdown of message interpretation. Words account for only 7% of emotional communication. Voice tone delivers 38% of the impact. So you figure that the words are just that. They're just words. There's nothing around them. It's just words. 7% people get the emotional communication when it comes to just the words, right? They get more out of the tone of voice. They get more out of how we deliver it. Are we using a soft voice? Are we using a loud voice? Are we being aggressive with our voice? 38% of that's when people read the impact that they get when they hear that conversation. And then 55% body language usually dominates the conversation. So body language has a higher percentage than your voice and more than your words, right? So body language is significant. It's significant and crucial to effective communication. As I said over the last 2 days, and you'll hear me say this on the presentations that I do over the 16 webinars, the ones that I instruct, it's not just about what we communicate, it's how we communicate, how we deliver that message. So this really kind of outlines that principle, and the belief that I have is that really it's a totality of what we do, but body language is so important when it comes to our communication. So I challenge all of you as you go through your day, just in non-aggressive or non-adverse situations, just through your normal contracts or contacts with people, start looking at people's body language, even when you're getting your coffee at Starbucks or at the local coffee shop, or when you go get your lunch. Watch people's body language when you're talking to them. And the more you look at it, the more you're going to learn how people respond to communication. So when we look at some common communication barriers, there's a couple of different barriers that we look at. We look at physical barriers, which is noisy environments, right? As a leader, you want to take a very good look at this, because as a leader, your leadership depends on these three barriers. And if you're identifying the environment that you're in, and when you're talking to somebody and you're mentoring somebody and you're coaching somebody, so you want to look at the physical barriers, right? Is the environment noisy? Is it, the phone's ringing off the hook and it's in the background? So when you're talking, you can hear people in the background. We all get those scam calls or those telemarketer calls, and you can hear somebody on the phone that you're talking to when they're starting to talk. If you take those calls, or if you may hear it and just hang up on them. But if you do stay on the line, you'll hear people in the background where there's like 15 other people in the same room and you have everybody talking. Those are noisy environments. Well, that happens in our work environment as well. We may not necessarily recognize it because we're in that environment every day. Say we're in the force, so we don't necessarily recognize what's also happening in the force because we've been there so long, it's become normal, right? The behavior inside our office has become normal. So you want to recognize, is there any physical barriers from a noisy environment? The distance between people, we'll talk a little bit about that as I go along in the slides here. It's important when we talk to people, how far apart we are, right? There's certain percentages or certain feet that is standard when people talk, that, are you in somebody's comfort zone? So we want to look at, if I'm in somebody's comfort zone, I'm going to create a barrier to where they may not necessarily be open to me talking to them. And again, poor technology connection, that's a physical barrier. We've all been in those positions. And I know some of the tribes are in the position today where their cell phones don't work, right? Or if you gotta lift one leg and put one arm up in the air, and you got to get the aluminum foil and put it on top of your desk and point in a certain direction, right? We've all been in those predicaments, and some are worse than others where poor technology is a problem. So that when you're trying to communicate to somebody and the phones are going dead, or your email system goes down and you have to rewrite the whole email, or you're reading something and then it gets deleted, physical barriers are important that we recognize. Psychological barriers are important. Preconceived notions. That's an important one. We all have our own perceptions of things. Perceptions are reality to individuals, and we have to just recognize that. Doesn't mean that it's true, but we all have our own beliefs, right? And sometimes when we read something, either on the internet or we read a memo, and we may not grasp the whole memo, that our preconceived notion is only half the story. So we have to recognize that do we have a preconceived notion? Is there somebody we're talking to have a preconceived notion? And how do we communicate through those barriers for that? Emotional state, we all have problems in life. Sometimes we have some issues that just overwhelm us, right? They're just things that happen. We may lose a loved one, or break up from our loved one, or something that occurs that creates that emotional state. We want to make sure that we recognize that as leaders, recognize that in your employees, because when you can recognize that, one, you can provide that support to the employee, and you won't necessarily deal with the issue right away, but your employee will appreciate the fact that you can recognize that there's a barrier, an emotional barrier here, and then you're going to give them that kind of space to have what they need so they can grow. Attention deficits, that's very important. Some people just they're so busy, their mind is so far ahead on what they're doing, right? They're worrying about what they're doing tonight after work. They're worrying about what they're doing this afternoon for lunch. They're not even really considering what's happening right now, right? So that's a barrier that we need to look at for our leadership style. It's important because we all have employees. I had employees that I could tell by talking to them, they're not even thinking about what I'm talking about. And then I'll stop the conversation. I'll just say, are you with me? Are you okay? Are you thinking about something else? And they'll, yeah, my son's having problems in school, and I know he's in math class right now, and he's got this big test, so you got to be able to pick up on that as a leader. So you want to make sure you can identify those psychological barriers. Language barriers is very important. In the public safety world and FEMA world, they use these acronyms, and they use the jargon, the police jargon. Those become barriers if you're talking to people that don't understand that world, right? So you want to be able to recognize whoever you're talking to, that jargon or terminology. Sometimes you don't want to talk at your level. You got to bring yourself down to an individual's level, because they may not understand just that concept. Doesn't mean they're not smart. It just means that you're in a different level than what they are, or a different understanding what they are, and you go into where they're at so you can help them grow, and then you pull them out of that, right? Different native languages, it's very important. I know in the environment that I worked in, there was 2 different native languages that were involved, and then you had the English language, right? So there was 3 different layers that we had to make sure that we can navigate, and we can help officers and firefighters understand when they came in contact with somebody that this was a language barrier, and then who do we call? How does that process go? So, language barriers are definitely something we want to take a look at. And then education differences, right? Some people are very book smart, but they're not necessarily street smart. Some people have great common sense, right? And they have the street smarts, but when it comes to the book and following policy to a T, yeah, they'd rather kind of just do on-the-job training. They don't need a policy. They just want to do on-the-job training. So you want to look at those barriers, because education barriers can play into the whole realm when it comes to communication. Communication style matrix. These are styles that you use, right? There's just not one style, and these are 4 styles that I identified that I think are important. And if you know how to use these styles, I think you can be very successful. And when to implement them, you can be very successful when you're communicating with your employees, right? So the director style kind of speaks for itself. You're going to be direct, decisive, focused on the results, right? You may come across too blunt, right? Too focused, too strong, right? Sometimes you need that, but you need to know when that needs to be delivered, right? It's the socializer style, right? The enthusiastic, optimistic, people-oriented type person, values relationships over tasks, right? That friendly person who just wants to be your friend, right? When you're a leader, you're not necessarily somebody's friend. You're a leader at work, right? But the socializer, you kind of come across a little bit more. You have the gift of gab. You know how to communicate with people and get the conversation going. So, and you're very excited, and you're always happy to be around. The thinker style, again, the analytical, the methodical, the detail-oriented. It seeks accuracy and logic. This is a style that I will tell you, for me, I'm a detailed-oriented person. And sometimes I have challenges with the analytical piece, right? Because I move so fast. So this style I like to use, but I also learn from this style every time I use it. So I want to make sure the thinker style, when I'm talking to somebody, there's people I can learn from, people that worked for me that really use this style a lot. And I would pay close attention on how they were talking to other people, because I could pick up some things that could work for me. So we can always learn from others. So as you navigate these four and you identify those styles that really, that foundation style you're going to use and when you're going to use it, you want to make sure that you're also recognizing the fact that when others use it, you can kind of steal that information, educate yourself, improve your communication style. And then the relator style, right? Somebody who's supportive, patient, relationship focused, avoids conflict and risk. This is another one that is a balanced one, you know, for employee wise. You want to make sure you have this style for your employees. You want to care for your employees. You want to recognize that they're there doing a job through you, right? You're getting something done through them, and then they're doing the job for you. So you want to make sure you recognize this, and you recognize employees on when to use the relator style. It's important. This is where you'll sometimes go into an environment and you do not want to get in any conflicts. You don't want to take any risks because it may go in a bad direction, right? So if you see an employee that is having a hard time, you don't want to push their buttons because you don't know if you're going to push them over the edge, right? Or you go to a community meeting and you know that person is very mad at your program or your employees, and you just know that there's nothing that you're going to say is going to win that person over tonight, but you're going to take this on. You're going to go to the relator style. You're going to be more supportive. You're going to be patient. You're just going to build on that relationship. You're not going to take those unnecessary risks. Identify your communication style. How can you do that? You can do that through self-assessments. This slide is for you to take away with you. You know, do you prefer direct communication? You know, do you prefer beating around the bush, really not telling somebody and let somebody else figure it out, right? Are you more task-oriented or people-oriented? Do you make decisions quickly or after careful deliberation? Or do you express emotions openly or keep your feelings private? Understanding your natural style helps adapt to others. There's no style inherent better or worse. As I talked about before, you want to maneuver those styles based on the circumstance. Most people blend the multiple styles depending on the context. Again, flexibility is key in your communication success. In 2023, McKinsey's study found adaptable communicators are 37% more likely to achieve leadership positions. So if you're a person that you can take these styles and you can use these styles and kind of maneuver, and you may change these styles in one conversation, right? You may start as a dictator and then all of a sudden you go down to the relator style. If you can identify yourself for that and you can manage yourself through these styles, you're going to be one dynamic, successful leader. Yes, Jacqueline, I appreciate that feedback. Some people can have more than one style of communication, and that's really where the success is, right? It's not just one, because our receiver is different, right? So one style may not work for who you're sending that message to. So thank you for that feedback. Lizette, thank you for your, Russell, thank you for your feedback, the relator style. And your director's a green, more of a director style. Good. Director is a green, more of a direct style. All right. Thank you for the feedback, Russell. Appreciate the presenter's call of staying mindful about our professional with our clients, communities we serve. All right. Thank you, Lizette, for that feedback. All right, so let's talk about the art of asking questions, right? There's several areas that sometimes we've heard this before throughout your career, and I think it's always important to bring it back and kind of bring it to the forefront because, you know, we try to deal with our time management, and sometimes we go through conversations, and at the end we're exhausted, right? We're exhausted, and we need that, right? Sometimes you just got to take the time to have conversations and catch the work up later, because those conversations are important, and what you deal with today is probably going to save you a lot of problems or circumstance in the future. So we have open-ended questions, right? That begins with who, what, where, why, and how, right? This is encourage detailed responses, right? One example would be, what challenges are you facing with this project? Always ask those who, what, where, when, and why, and how. Why is a great one. I will tell you, I was always taught going through my leadership journey that if you can always ask the question why, and you can identify by using the term why, you will bring a conversation along, you will bring solutions along, you will identify a lot of areas that individuals are growing at, a lot of areas where people need help at, and a lot of areas on how people feel, right? So why is in my experience has been really successful for me. Closed questions, that's one of those areas where you don't get a lot of information on closed questions, right? It's good for confirming what you're understanding, but it's not necessarily good for if you're looking for answers. So you want to be mindful of the closed questions and understand that you're going to get a very short answer with a closed question, right? Probing questions, dig deeper into the response to gain additional information. This is one of those areas where I'd have a citizen's complaint. I'd go out and I'd take about a half hour just sitting with somebody on their front porch, and I would probe their questions, right? I would dig deeper on how they would respond. I would ask them, can you respond a little bit deeper for me on that? Can you elaborate a little bit more? I want to understand and put myself in your position, and then I'd ask the why question. Why do you feel that way? What brings you to that conclusion? Right. So you want to probe those questions. One example would be, could you elaborate on that specific issue? That's a simple follow-up question you can use. And then there's reflective questions, right? Paraphrase to confirm and understand, to show how you're listening, right? This is another feedback that is important, that sometimes we don't necessarily tell people that we got the message, right? If you could do the reflective questioning, it confirms for other people that you're really listening to what they're saying. Because sometimes they may have a preconceived notion through your body language or maybe your facial expression, or maybe you talk to them and all of a sudden, what do? You pick up your phone and you look at your phone, right? We're all guilty with phones these days. People will be talking to us and then we look at our phone. So we take our mind away, or we give the appearance that we're not listening. A reflective question is really a good question to bring the conversation back on task, or allow them to see the conversation never left the task, because you're paraphrasing what they're saying. And I just share with you from a communication standpoint, phones are really impacting our communication. It's providing that opportunity for people to think we're not listening. It gives a perception we're not listening. So if you have the opportunity and you're in conversations with somebody, let the conversations flow without looking at your phone, without looking at your email. I understand there's those circumstances where you may have family issues. You may be waiting for a doctor to call. Let the person know, listen, I just want to let you know, if I get a phone call, I'm going to have to take it because I'm waiting for a doctor's appointment, or I'm waiting on this call. I have a family issue. You don't have to go into detail. Just give them enough to let them know you're not going to be disrespectful. And when you grab your phone, you're not trying to tell them they're not important, right? Because that's where communication breaks down. Let them know that in the beginning, listen, I want to have this conversation with you. I value what you're going to say, right, as your leader, but just understand I'm waiting on this phone call. And when it comes in, we'll have to take a break. Let me take the phone call and we'll get right back into it, right? But in the meantime, you have my undivided attention, and the phone is going to sit there and the emails are going to sit there and they're going to wait. So remember that. And if you happen to forget that, then what you can do is you can use a reflective question, because a lot of times I've trained myself, which is probably a bad habit. I've trained myself to where I can listen and look. I can do multiple things at once, being that you're on a radio, you're texting, you're on a laptop computer, you're driving a car, dealing with emergencies, you're multitasking, right? So sometimes you don't realize those multitasking impact our communication. And that's one habit for me that I probably sent the wrong message to people over my career, where I would look at my phone while they're talking. But one of the things that I taught myself was, when they got done talking, I would paraphrase exactly what they said, at least bring that conversation back to balance that I was listening to you. Although I was disrespectful by looking at my phone, I was listening to you, and I value our conversation. The funnel techniques, this is important. It's open general questions, right? You want to begin by broadly establishing a comfort and context. This is a technique that you can use when you're talking to somebody and questioning somebody. The probing question, again, narrow focus to areas requiring deeper exploration. Specific questions, target precise details needed for the understanding. And again, the closing questions confirm and understand identify the next step. So the funnel technique, this is how your conversations can flow. If you're a leader and you need to dig into something, you can use the funnel technique. Start with open-ended questions, then do your probing questions, then you lock it into specific questions, and then you do your closing questions. So this is an area that's really used in a public safety standpoint, but it gives that foundation. You can use it in a leadership standpoint, even a community standpoint. If you're in the community dealing with people, you can use the funnel techniques. And what that funnel technique is basically these 4 areas of questions, and you just go right in line. Start with your open-ended questions, begin very broad, establish comfort, establish that relationship, and then start going into your probing questions, specific questions, and closing questions. I will tell you the funnel technique is important, but it takes a little bit of time, because the first part about it is getting people comfortable to talk, getting your subordinates relaxed, especially when you're in a leadership position. People are guarded coming to your office or sitting at your desk. You're the boss, so they're already going to be on guard, or they're sitting there in their mind. They're thinking, it's my boss. I don't want to make them unhappy, so I'm going to tell them what they want to hear, right? And as a boss, that's not what you want. You want people to be open. You want people to recognize that, they are a value to our organization and their input is important. And so you can use this funnel technique to really establish that relationship and get people relaxed to where whatever you're trying to navigate through, you have the opportunity to be successful. Strategic questions framework. This is another part of the process. This was developed by Toyota, believe it or not, from a sales standpoint, but it can be used and it is used in businesses and in organizations. It involves asking the why 5 times to get the root of the problem out. I talked about earlier, here's an example. Why did the project fail? Why was the deadline missed? Why wasn't progress monitored? Continuing to root causes identified, right? If you can use the why and just continue to use the why, you're going to get down to the root issue as a leader, and gives you the opportunity to find solutions, right? And when you're asking why, people are giving you feedback. They're in a position where they have the knowledge, they have the information, and just by asking those questions. Well, I would tell you is that when you ask these questions, you don't want to be demanding or forceful. Just ask them through a conversation so your technique is on point. Spin questioning, this is a proven sales method that works in any profession. You can ask a situational question, a problem questions, implication questions, and need to pay off questions, right? Need to pay off is focus on the solution. Implications is explore the consequences. Problem questions, you identify those challenges or problems that are there, and the situation questions are to establish context. Again, the spin questioning is just another model that you can use as you navigate your communication process. Power of nonverbal communication. It's so important that we recognize nonverbal. Nonverbal communication accounts for up to 93% of message interpretation, right? So just think about that for a second. Nonverbal communication, 93% of it is really how we identify as the receiver. 93% of that is done through not what I hear, it's what I see. Right? It's what I see. It's what I'm observing. It's what I'm interpreting. 93%. So that's a high value number, percentage that we just want to recognize. Your body speaks volumes when you're completely silent, right? As you see, I'm very automated with my hands. I like to move around. If I had a classroom, I'd walk around the classroom. I'm a person that I don't like to use a microphone unless I really have to. And I'll walk around when I'm teaching a class. I'll walk around the class right? And I'll look at people and I call on people because I want that engagement, right? So, but I recognize the fact that nonverbal communication, I'll watch people's body language to see how they are. When I walk into a room as a leader, you know, you can see if somebody's having a bad day or their shoulders slouched. Are they avoiding me? You know, are their eye contact not necessarily looking at me? Those are all key factors. It may not be what you're perceiving, but it's something that you just have to recognize because it plays into maybe your solution on how you're going to communicate. MIT research shows nonverbal cues predict negotiation outcomes at 87% accuracy. Nonverbal signals are processed by the brain system by verbal content. Key elements of the body language are facial expressions. 7 universal expressions exist across cultures, right? We have happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, contempt, and surprise. Eye contact, appropriate eye contact signals confidence and trustworthiness, right? And cultural norms determine ideal duration. So I will share with you is that I was taught in law enforcement that, you know, people's eyes tell you a lot, right? When I came to work, when I first started with the Seminole Tribe, you know, I recognized the fact that some people wouldn't look at me. You know, I'd sit and talk to them. They'd answer my questions, but they didn't look at me, right? And then I had an elder tell me, listen, people don't look at you in that are in this culture. Some people with the cultural beliefs, they're not looking at you to be disrespectful. They're not looking at you because they're lying. They're not looking at you because they respect you. They don't want to disrespect you. So they're not looking at you in your eye, right? So sometimes in environments, we have to recognize that whatever is in a book, not necessarily is a one-off and a one-all be-all, right? So we have to just gauge that depending on who we're talking to. We have to make sure that we evaluate the totality of the circumstance when we're talking to somebody, because eye contact is important, right? In law enforcement, sometimes that eye contact, if you're deceiving me, you're not going to look in the eye or look me in the eye. And that may lead to your being dishonest, right? But in some cultures, like the culture that I grew up in, some people didn't look at you because they respected you and they were taught from a young age, don't look at people in their eye because it's disrespectful. And how I was able to confirm that is when I talked to people, they'd still talk to me. My communication was good with them. They'd answer my questions. I didn't have any issues. Just they wouldn't look at me in the eye, right? They wouldn't look at me because of the fact that they wanted to respect me. And so that was different from what I was taught. So we want to recognize that as we go through our communication process. Posture, again, upright, projects confidence. Lean forward shows engagement. Slouching shows disinterest, right? So there's a nexus to when we communicate how our body language is, right? So if I'm slouched in a chair and I'm trying to motivate you, I'm probably not going to motivate you too much because my body language is telling you that I don't really care, right? My words are telling you, hey, you know, let's do a great job. It's a happy environment, but my body language is like, no, it's not. This is a gross environment. You know, it's an environment I don't want to be at. It stinks, you know. So we want to make sure that our posture, when we're talking to people as a leader, that our posture is right on, that we're confident in our delivery. If we need to show that we're engaged in the conversation, we should move forward. As leaders, you should never show that slouching. However, you need to be able to identify when your employees are slouching in the chair because there may be some underlying issues. Open gestures, open palms signal honesty. Pointing can appear aggressive. Steepling fingers suggest confidence. You know, these are areas, again, we're going to look at. Sometimes you can look at somebody's hand and you can see the moisture that's growing on their hand. Maybe they're nervous, right? They're nervous. They sit and they just kind of wipe their hands off on their pants or on their shirt. They're moving around a little bit and they're drying their hands off. So hand gestures play a lot into how our body elements are talking to us and talking to the people that we're talking to, right? Here's the science of space, right? Edward Hall identified 4 spatial zones that impact communication. This is important, right? Intimate spaces from 0 to 18 inches, right? That's usually reserved for close relationships. So as you see, what ends up happening is when you're talking to somebody, you want to make sure you recognize these spaces and you're in the appropriate space, right? Because you can you can offend somebody or even turn the conversation in a negative light if you are too close to somebody or you're presenting yourself closer than really what you should. So 0 to 18 inches is reserved more for a close relationship. Personal space, 18 inches to 4 feet, right? For friends and acquaintances, usually it's 18 inches to 4 feet. And a lot of times we just do this naturally when we're standing around talking to people. But when we're a boss, we need to recognize the fact that when we're using that title and we're talking on behalf of the leadership position we were in, we need to make sure we recognize and identify the space that we're in, right? So really, as a boss, you really shouldn't be in the intimate space at all unless you're consoling one of your employees for a specific reason that they need that consultation for, right? Social space, 4 to 12 feet. This is traditionally the business casual social interaction. This is really where you want to talk to people. A lot of times when you're dealing with employees, you may have a desk that kind of separates you and your employee. But if you don't have that and you're just kind of standing in a room, or if you have chairs that are around a room, you want to look at spacing them about 4 to 12 feet. And of course, public space is about 12 feet or more for speaking to big groups and strangers. So again, we want to recognize the cultural variations that happen in your community that are important, right? You don't want to offend the environment that you're in. You don't want to offend your employees, but it's something you want to take note of, right? In 2022, a global workspace study found the optimal collaboration distance is between 3 to 5 feet, right? So you look at the fact that it's around the social spacing is really the common area that you want to make sure you give yourself that opportunity as a leader. So as a leader, you want to recognize that spatial science of space that you have to be in. Paralanguage, how you say it, right? The voice tone. Your tone can completely change your message meaning, right? The same words can convey opposite intentions. So go back to what I was talking about when I started my career. My voice was carrying along in conversations, and my supervisors and people were mentoring me how to bring that to my attention, right? I have a very deep voice. It's very commanding. And they got me to realize that there's a better way to handle my communication with people when I'm coming up on scene. So your voice plays into the circumstance. So you want to make sure you understand your voice. You understand the pitch and volume, right? When do you lower your pitch? When do you raise your pitch, right? When are you going to be more direct and forceful you're going to be more, relaxed, laid back, supportive, right? So you want to make sure that you recognize your pitch and your volume. You want to recognize if a higher pitch is going to signal if you want to be excited or stressful. Lower pitch, you want to display that confidence and authority. Pace and rhythm, speaking too quickly suggests nervousness, or unless you're in my case with these 90-minute webinars where I'm trying to provide all the information, which I think just can be very beneficial for you. Pace and rhythm are important. Strategic pauses create emphasis and allow absorption. I will tell you that pregnant pause, we've always heard that term, the pregnant pause, where don't necessarily be so quick to answer somebody's question once they get done talking, right? Give the opportunity to sit back and give that space, right? Even when you're doing interviews, when you interview somebody and you ask them a question, a lot of times in interviews, people are nervous. But the reality is a proper interview answer is going to be finish with the question. I'm going to give myself time to formulate my answer because I'm listening to understand. I'm not listening to respond. So that pregnant pause is going to be there. So you want to make sure as a leader, sometimes you want to give a little bit pregnant pause to your employees, give them the benefit of the doubt, let them get their thoughts together to where they don't feel the stress and they can answer your questions. And you're going to maximize their support for you, right? You're going to maximize whatever issue you're handling, give them that opportunity to strategize their own answer in their head instead of just kind of pounding them with, what's your answer? What's your answer? Pause. Let them formulate that answer for you, or you pause. And if you have to talk, give yourself some time to pause and let the conversation just sink into them. Vocal variety, again, monotone delivery. You lose the audience. I'm sure all of you saw the movie Ferris Bueller. The instructor there where he's saying Bueller. That's the type of monotone you don't want to get caught up in when you're a leader, because you will lose your employees, right? So you want to recognize, as far as your delivery, you want to recognize the audience that you're talking to. And a varied delivery increases engagement by 40%. So there's not one delivery type that you're going to be delivering through your whole discussion. You may use all four of these, right? You may use all four of these that work to your advantage. Again, there's no square peg, square hole. These are areas that you can use to improve your communication. And if you use all of them, you're going to be more well-rounded. Reading nonverbal cues, clusters matter more than singles, right? Look for consistent patterns rather than isolated gestures. Remember, I talked about the individuals that wouldn't look me in the eye, but they were answering all my questions. There was no other body language issues. It was just, they just weren't looking me in the eye. So that's where I had all these clusters, but the consistent pattern was there that, okay, it's just the eyes. It's not the body. They're not nervous. Their hands aren't, moving around. They're not sweaty. They don't have sweaty palms. They're not turning away from me. They're just not looking me in the eye. So again, clusters matter more than just that single event or that single body language. Context is critical. The same gesture can mean different things in different settings. Arms crossed might indicate disagreements or just being cold, right? So we were taught, and I was taught, when someone closes their arms like this, they've closed you off, right? They've closed you off to where they're not listening to you. And that may be the case, but it also this may be a comfortable position that they like sitting in, right? Doesn't mean they're not listening to me. Doesn't mean that they're closed off. Their arms are closed, but they can still listen, right? So we don't want to get locked into the fact that, arms closed automatically means that they've shut us down, right? You take it in consideration, you evaluate in full context. Key signals to watch for as you navigate your nonverbal cues in communication as a leader. Nodding but not making eye contact is a polite disagreement, right? We've all seen that. And sometimes we've seen that in disrespectful, where people nod, but their eyes are telling you something different. Feet pointed towards the exit, that means they're just moving around and they're looking, they want to leave the conversation. They're just very uncomfortable in the conversation. Mirroring your posture, they're trying to connect with you if they're mirroring your posture, or they're emulating you. I've never experienced it to where they're mirroring my posture to make fun of you or to like challenge you. It's more of they're trying to build a rapport with you. They feel that, it's comfortable. And they may be emulating you because they want to be professional like you are. So just remember that. Micro expressions, again, those are 1 in 25 seconds. Every 25 seconds, they give you some sort of micro expression that they're changing along the way, right? They're always moving. There's something happening. So you want to look for those signs. And then, is there incongruence between the words and the body language? What they're saying, is it matching the body language, or is it something that it's just totally contradictory, right? So you want to look at those areas to help you with some of the key signals to watch for when you're in a leadership position. And you can look and use these through when you're dealing with employees and also you're dealing with your community. Active listening, again, is defined by hearing. The physical reception of sound, right? Hearing is the physical reception of sound. Attending, paying focused attention, right? Are the individuals paying attention to what you're saying? Understanding, comprehending the message. Interpreting, finding meaning behind the words. And responding, providing appropriate feedback. Active listening is deliberate practice that involves your full presence, mentally, emotionally, and physically. So I wanted to provide the definitions for you here, because sometimes we've heard it in our life. We've been taught it on certain levels, but sometimes we can go back to it and it kind of resonates, and we can improve ourselves and improve our communication. Listening versus waiting to speak, right? We talked about, and I talked about earlier, the phraseology about people listen to respond, not necessarily to understand. Stephen Covey, that's that message that he likes to put out as well. And really, he's a great leader that talks about communication. If you've never read any of his books, I highly recommend. And his quote is, "Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply." And that seems to be the common theme. The other part is now you throw in social media, you throw in text messages, you throw in all these other things that are happening in the 21st century, and it makes it more difficult, right? Harvard research shows we typically remember only 25% of what we hear. Active listening can raise this to 75%, right? So if I have multiple things going on, right, I'm only going to remember probably about 25% of what people tell me, right? Active listening can raise this to 75%, right? So if we're focused on our listening and not necessarily focused on how we respond to it, we listen. When they're done talking, we formulate our answer, and then when we can respond, then we're going to be about 75% on target. So as a leader, you want to make sure that you focus on when people talk to you, give your employees the opportunity to speak and your undivided attention. I know you have a lot of things going on, and I know the phones are probably ringing off the hook and the emails are going, but if you don't give them the attention and you don't give them the opportunity to speak, and you don't give yourself that opportunity to learn from them when they're speaking or listen to them, you're going to deal with a bigger problem down the road because you're only getting about 25% of what they're saying. So again, listen, wait for them to speak, formulate your verbiage, and then you can deliver your message to them. The HEAR active listening framework, this is a framework that you can use. HEAR is halt, engage, anticipate, and replay. HALT is stop talking, thinking, planning your response, and create mental space to receive, right? That means basically just clear your mindset, clear your environment so you have the opportunity to hear, right? Engage, give yourself full attention through appropriate eye contact, nodding, and language. It's so important as a leader for people that work for you to understand that you are listening to them, you support them, you're willing to coach them, mentor them, and you only can show that if they see that you're listening to them and you're actively listening to them, right? Anticipate, look for meanings beyond words, listen for emotions, values, and needs. This is important because not only do you have to do this yourself, you can look at your employees to see what words they're using, what emotions do you see coming out, right? What value, you can talk when you listen to your employees. Are they compassionate about the work they're doing? Do they appreciate the value of working in a community that's so rich in culture and that they have the opportunity to make a difference in someone's lives? So you want to try and anticipate the emotional piece, and then again back to replay, rephrase what you've heard, confirm it, understand it, and show that the value in their input. It's so important that you recognize people's value as a leader. Empathetic listening techniques reflect the feelings. It sounds like you're frustrated with how the project is progressing. These are comments that you could say, where you can recognize and you can show empathetic listening techniques to people and let people know that you're human. You may be a leader, you may be a boss, but you do have feelings and you want to let them know that you appreciate them, right? You can validate their experiences. You can say things like, that's a challenging situation. Anyone would find that difficult, right? Or I would find that difficult. I appreciate you handling that because I would find that difficult if I was in your shoes, right? Ask clarifying questions. Can you help me understand what aspects concern you the most, right? That's an example for a clarifying question. And then again, you want to summarize key points. So your main concerns are timeline, budget, and team capability, right? Or capacity. So you want to make sure that you provide the empathetic listening techniques to your employees. And it's important. You want to show that you're empathetic to your employees, but you do that through communicating. You do that through good listening. We touch base a little bit on listening across Native American cultures. It's so unique when you're in a Native American culture that the rest of the world and the rest of the country can learn from some of the techniques and the listening and communication issues that are within Indian country. So as employees of tribes, you want to make sure that you recognize the value of the environment that you're working in, right? The value of silence as time for thoughtful consideration, right? A lot of times I witness elders across the country that, they're very strategic. They don't speak a lot, but when they speak, they have a very powerful message that they're giving out. And that's what we're losing. And it's us as leaders that can bring that back. We can learn from that and bring that back. Storytelling is another opportunity that we can use to help mitigate some issues. That's an important piece we don't want to lose. It shares the wisdom that we bring to the table. So you want to look at the fact that speaking in turn rather than interrupting is something that is very important. So do not interrupt. Do not interrupt your employees. When you interrupt your employees, your employees are gonna shut down. So I share with you, not just in Native American cultures, in any environment that you work in, if you interrupt your employees are going to feel disrespected. They're going to feel that they're not valued, and then you're gonna see a decrease in that productivity. So as a boss, don't interrupt. Let them speak. And let them get it off because you're going to learn a lot more, right? So those are things that you can do from your aspect is give them that respect to speak as they will give you the respect as well. Conflict resolution, you want to recognize conflicts. Notice the rising tensions in the room, the verbal, nonverbal cues for escalation. You want to create a safe space for people, right? That's important to make sure people know that they can speak, they can talk without being judged. You want to focus on comprehending perspectives before reforming responses. You want to address issues without personal attacks or blame, right? And work together on resolutions that impose answering, right? So one of the things that you can ask your subordinates as a leader is, if you were in my shoes, how would you handle this, right? If you were in my shoes and you had an employee who did this, how would you handle this circumstance? Let them give you the answer. Right? Because I will tell you a lot of times people will, if they can put themselves in your shoes as a leader, they will actually give you the answer. And then it's an issue where both of you are solving it instead of you just dictating or you telling them what those circumstances are. So when you're communicating with your employees, put them in your shoes, ask them those questions. Thomas Kilman, he's got some conflict modes. There's 5 strategies that typically used when facing conflict situations. These are what people use when they're facing conflict situations. They avoid it, right? They're accommodating. They just give in. They yield to others. They build goodwill, but they may lead to resentment if overused. They're competing, right? If there's conflict, they want to be competing in situations. They compromise. They find that middle ground, and then they collaborate, right? So these are areas that when you encounter somebody where there's conflict, one of these 5 areas is what they're going to pick. An employee's going to avoid it. They're going to be accommodating. Yeah, I'll go ahead and do it. Not a problem. I'll do it. Just as if they're just making things happy. They're going to be competitive because they want to stand out from others. They'll compromise, say, okay, you know what? I don't necessarily agree, but I'll do it because this is going to get done. Or they're going to jump in and say, let's collaborate. Let's do this together, and we can work together through this conflict. So depending on the situation, you want to be able to identify these areas so you can navigate your leadership response. De-escalation communication techniques. There's the LEAF method, which is listen without interrupting, emphasize with perspective, ask clarifying questions, find common ground. Tactical empathy is label emotions. It seems like you're frustrated, right? You're identifying them that they're frustrated, and you're just confirming to them that the situation. You mirror their valid concerns. You slow down the pace and lower voice volume, and you maintain non-threatening body language. Or the strategic pause. Allow silence after emotional statements. Count to 10 before responding. If you have anger, or if they're angry, count to 10 before you respond. Let that anger kind of dissipate to where they have a moment to take a breath. Suggest to take a break, or use pattern interrupts to reset the conversation, right? Change the topic, reset the conversation. Assertiveness versus aggressiveness. You can either stand up for personal rights express needs, feelings, ideas are direct, respect other boundaries, use I statements to own feelings, and maintain appropriate eye contact. Aggressive communication violates other rights and boundaries, uses intimidation or manipulation, employs use statements that blame, often involve raised voices or threatening tone, and may include invasive body language. Stay away from the aggressiveness and be more assertive when you're speaking. Assertiveness is twice as effective as resolving workplace conflicts compared to the passive or aggressive approach. So aggressive communication is never successful. It may make you feel good, but it's never successful. Assertive formula, you can use the DESC model, which is describe, express, specify, or consequence. In consequence, describe is objectively state the behavior or situation without any judgment. Share your feelings or thoughts about how it's impacting you, right? Use the term I. Specify, you can clearly request change you'd like to see. Let the employee know, look, I'd like our meetings to start promptly as scheduled on time, or I'd like to see more effort out of you. Consequence, explain the positive outcome and making the change. Setting communication boundaries. This is important. You don't want to sit around and just talk and talk and talk and talk. Set boundaries for your meetings. Establish those boundaries in the beginning. Establish the response time with your expectations. Emotional boundaries, that should always be a given where we request and respect each other's tone and language. Separate the emotions from your own and stay away from any toxic conversation. Informational boundaries, establish confidentiality expectations, define what you will and won't discuss, and protect sensitive personal details. So as we set communication boundaries as a leader, these are 3 areas we want to think about before we go and meet with employees. Threat versus the reward response. Your brain is wired to protect you. Your brain is wired to go into the defensive mode if it feels that there's a threat, right? So it processes communication either by threatening or rewarding. A perceived threat activates the brain in a response to shut down high reasoning. Psychological safety activates the cortex in enhancing creative problem solving and collaboration. When you're talking to somebody, the brain, if they feel threatened, it automatically goes into the threat mode. So, and it shuts down. So, because the brain's going to protect you. So we want to recognize that the environment, we can actually subconsciously or consciously trigger somebody to shut down on us. When we look at generational communication, we dealt with it yesterday when we were talking about becoming a leader and becoming a manager. We're dealing with all types of generations, and generations communicate differently. So we want to look at like the lost generation, right? They prefer more written correspondence. They value that proper etiquette. The greatest generation, they favor direct face-to-face conversation, right? Silent generation value in-person meetings and phone calls. Baby boomers are more face-to-face or phone conversations. Generation X is they appreciate that direct, efficient communication. Millennials are comfortable with digital channels. Generation Z, they want that brief, short visual communication. And Generation Alpha, which we're dealing with now, are more inclined to the computer generation, touchscreen. They want that full immersion. So we want to look and recognize those individuals, what generation they're in, because it's important as a leader that we recognize so we know how to communicate with them. Digital communication, emails are very important. When we write an email, are we writing it through our emotion? Remember, your emails don't have emotion. So when people read it, are they really getting the tone or message that you're sending? So you want to make sure your emails are always professional, and nearly half of all email recipients misinterpret the tone or the intent of your business email. So just remember that when you send an email, whatever message you're trying to send, they're probably not getting it through email. Nonverbal loss, percentage of communication cues lost in text-only digital exchange, right? So when we're texting somebody, we lose that nonverbal. Platform switches, average number of communication platforms used by professionals daily. Everybody's on Snapchat, social media, Instagram, TikTok. You have your email, you have your work internet or intranet. You have all these different things that are happening. That plays into your leadership communication. Video calls, 3 times more effective than audio only for complex topics. People want to see other individuals on video calls. They're not necessarily in tune with just hearing a voice. Some people like it, the audio books. You don't necessarily see a person, you just hear the voice. Sometimes it's too monotone, and I think those percentages are lower. Choose the right channel. Again, this one is, how do you communicate? Choose which way is the best way to communicate to get your message across. Email communications, this is best practices. I'll just go over this really quick. I appreciate your time this afternoon. You want to structure for maximal impact. Clear, be specific, subject line, increase opens to 35%. Begin with concise statement, your purpose statement. You want to be bold with key actions and with a clear next step or expectation. Again, tone and timing is important. All caps, people receive that. They say you're yelling if it's in all caps. So you want to make sure you take note of that. Everyone's getting emoji friendly where it's kind of out of hand, and there's emojis for everything. So and there's different perceptions on that. So you want to keep your professional context when it comes to emojis. Virtual meetings, this is something that is important, but there's a lot of things that go along with it from a communication standpoint. The messaging is getting lost in virtual meetings because people have so much going on. They're multitasking, just like I'm sure some of you are sitting at the desk. You're listening to this webinar, and you're also doing other things. That's just the way these circumstances are, but you do not get the full concept of whatever webinar you're on. So remember that as a leader. If you have people that are online, most likely they're not getting your full message. They're getting a percentage, but there's also a decline in the effectiveness of what you're trying to do. Communicate with influence. You want to establish credibility. You want to connect emotionally. You want to present logical evidence. And again, time your message so it's strategic and it's on point. Storytelling, I talked about that earlier. It's important to incorporate that in your process flow. It gives people the sense of belonging. It gives people the sense of what happened in the past and why you do things the way you do. And as a leader, it gives the opportunity to show growth amongst your employees. When you're you can use this as a communication assessment tool. 360 feedback is so important. Ask people how you communicate. What I would ask you, for the supervisors on the call, go to your supervisors and ask the question to them this: how do they feel working for you? And be ready for that answer. Be ready for that answer. How do they feel working for you, right? But you need to ask yourself the question before you go to them. What would it be like working for you? What's it like working for Will Latchford? What's it like working for Brooke Warrington? Ask yourself that question and see if your answer and their answer matches. Personal development plan, you can go through this. This helps you with your personal communication plan. You can assess your current skills. You can use SMART goals. You can practice your deliberate delivery and listening techniques. You can seek feedback, and then you can reflect and you can adapt in how you're doing your job. Key takeaways today: we identified barriers. We talked about the art fully of questioning. We harnessed some nonverbal discussions. We talked about active listening and navigating challenges and communicating assertively. Some of the references, some nice books that you can read if you like to read to help you through your communication journey. This is in the PowerPoint that Brooke provided you. This is my information on the webinar. And what I would, in closing, what I would tell you is, as a leader, people depend on you. They depend on you to be perfect every day. Although you will not be perfect, and that's okay, always strive to do the best for the employees that work for you. And while striving to be the best for the employees to work for you, focus on your communication. Focus on how you talk to them. Focus on that messaging that you're giving them. And also focus on how you're listening to them. Focus on your body language, and focus on when they're talking to you, are you really showing that you care about them? You support them. You're mentoring them. All they want is somebody to be on their team. So it's very important for your communication as a leader that you recognize that you have to always be at the top of your game when it comes to leadership. Brooke, that's the end of the PowerPoint. Everyone, I wish you, however you celebrate your holidays, I wish you the best over the next week. Please make sure that you take care of your employees. And tonight when you go home, make sure you shut your phones off, shut your computers off, and take care of your families, because that's really the backbone. They allow you to do what you do every day and have fun at what you do. So, Brooke, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Will. This was such a fantastic kickoff for the leadership series. If any of you had missed day 1 on coaching and mentoring, or day 2 on becoming management material, you can find those recordings as well as the PDF of the slides in the courses section here on the learning platform. If you don't have your menu expanded, it's the book with a little bookmark sticking in it. That'll take you to the courses section. I did put the link to today's webinar feedback survey in the chat. I see that a lot of folks were doing day 1 and 2. It is a different survey for each individual webinar, so I'd appreciate it if you did one more for us. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes, and it is completely anonymous. There's no email or name connected to it. You're just a number when I pull the information, and then we share that feedback with our instructors as well. So it helps us at the Native Learning Center know what you're enjoying, what we can improve upon for the future. We share that information with Dr. Latchford, so it helps him as well. And then there's even stuff on there where you can recommend future topics that you would like for us to try to get for future webinars. So it's helpful to everybody all around, if you don't mind taking a few minutes to complete that for us. We hope you can join us for our next webinar. This is one that was actually postponed due to an emergency, and we were able to get it back on the books, so we're really excited. So this is going to be next week on Tuesday. I know a lot of people might already be on vacation. No worries, we'll record it. But it's Restoring Balance, Self-Care for Native Serving Professionals, and that'll be with Linnell Smith, and she is the owner of Black Sheep Insight Consulting and Coaching. Her webinars have been doing really well. They're very great. So I hope you can join us for that next week on Tuesday. And feel free to check out this as well as our other recorded webinars on our YouTube channel. There is a whole playlist called the Cathedra Webinar Archive, and that has all of our recorded webinars for about the past 2 years, I think maybe like 2.5 now. So YouTube is free to use, free to use. So that's a great resource for you to explore our archives and see a lot of the webinars we've done in the past. We hope you can check out our upcoming training events. We post about them to our social media all the time. We are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And then if you're somebody who likes to listen to podcasts, we do have an in-house produced one. We go into more micro topics within tribal housing and self-determination. You can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcasts. And then if you like to watch people get interviewed, we post those recordings with our special guests also to our YouTube channel. But otherwise, that is all we have for you today, folks. Will, you're getting a lot of love in the chat. Love to see it. I'm just going to scroll back to the webinar feedback survey slide. No pressure. Just encouraging you guys to do that for us if you get a chance. But otherwise, this is our last one for the week, folks. Will showed you the schedule. He's got a lot more coming throughout this whole calendar and fiscal year. We're very excited about it. And like I said, if you missed day 1 or day 2, we do have those recordings here on the learning platform. But if you are somebody who celebrates, I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving with your families next week. If you're not able to join us for the Tuesday webinar, not to fear, I will be recording that one as well. So you can always go back and watch it a little later. And then if this one struck you and you want to share this with a colleague or a friend, takes about a night for the recordings to generate, but I will post this tomorrow morning. But that's all we have for you, folks. I'm going to go ahead and keep the course open, but I am turning off the recording.